My name is Wanda Harrison, and I am 65 years old. Yesterday I watched helplessly as the tornado that tore through our town reduced my home of 30 years to splinters and debris. I survived with only the clothes on my back and my purse. My first thought was gratitude to be alive. My second was fear of what comes next. I called my son Jeffrey, who lives just 20 miles away in a beautiful house I helped him buy 5 years ago. We've grown distant lately, but surely in this crisis, blood would prove thicker than water. I was wrong in ways I never imagined possible. If you're watching this, please hit that like button, subscribe to my channel, and let me know where you're watching from. I want to share how quickly life can change, and how the people you expect to catch you might let you fall instead. Before the tornado struck, I had been living a quiet, predictable life in Millfield, a small town where I'd taught elementary school for 32 years before retiring. Widowed for 5 years since my husband Robert passed from a heart attack, I'd adjusted to life alone in our modest 2-story home on Maple Street. My days followed a comfortable routine: morning coffee on the porch, tending my garden book club on Thursdays, and occasional substitute teaching when the school called. That Tuesday started like any other spring day in Oklahoma. The sky was clear in the morning when I walked to the local bakery for my weekly treat of fresh sourdough. By noon, the Weather Channel was issuing warnings about a storm system moving through the county. We get these alerts often enough that most of us have become complacent. I remember thinking I should bring in the patio furniture, but decided to finish my novel first. By 3 in the afternoon, the sky had turned an eerie greenish black. The emergency alert system blared from my phone and television simultaneously. The tornado sirens began their haunting wail across town. I grabbed my emergency bag, my purse, and a framed photo of Robert and me on our 30th anniversary, then hurried to the basement. The noise is what I remember most vividly. People describe it as a freight train, but that doesn't capture the terrifying roar that seems to come from everywhere at once. The house shook violently above me. Glass shattered, wood splintered. I huddled in the corner of the basement behind an old mattress I'd propped against the wall, praying harder than I had since Robert was in the hospital. "Please, God, let me live through this," I whispered repeatedly, clutching the photo to my chest. The storm raged for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. When the roaring finally stopped, an unnatural silence followed that was almost as frightening. I waited another 10 minutes before cautiously climbing the basement stairs. Where the door to the main floor should have been, there was now open sky. My house, the home Robert and I had saved for years to buy, where we'd raised our son Jeffrey, where 30 years of memories lived in every corner, was gone. Completely gone. The roof had vanished entirely. Most of the second floor had collapsed onto what remained of the first. Rain poured in freely, soaking what few possessions remained intact. My bedroom was simply gone, along with all my clothes, jewelry, and personal items. The kitchen was a tangle of broken cabinets and appliances. In the living room, one wall stood partially intact, with a bookshelf still somehow attached, my books turning to pulp in the rain. I stood there in shock until my neighbor Carl found me. He and his wife Maria had a concrete storm shelter in their backyard and had survived unharmed. Their house had suffered damage, but was still standing. "Wanda, thank God you're okay," Carl called out, picking his way through the debris. "Maria's been worried sick about you." I couldn't speak. I just gestured at the ruin around me. "I know," he said gently, putting his arm around my shoulders. "Come on. Emergency services are setting up at the high school. Let's get you somewhere safe." The next few hours passed in a blur. The tornado had cut a half-mile-wide path through Millfield. 7 people had died, dozens were injured, and at least 30 homes were completely destroyed, including mine. The Red Cross set up cots in the high school gymnasium. Insurance adjusters and FEMA representatives would arrive the next day, we were told. A building inspector came to assess my property the following morning. His verdict was unequivocal: the structure was completely uninhabitable and would need to be demolished. Whatever could be salvaged needed to be removed immediately. Carl and Maria helped me sift through the wreckage. We found a few intact photo albums, some kitchen items, and a plastic bin of winter clothes from the basement. Everything else was destroyed or damaged beyond repair. My insurance agent, Barry Franklin, arrived later that day. The news wasn't good. My policy would cover only about 60% of what it would cost to rebuild due to an act of God clause and increased construction costs since my last policy update. The payout would take weeks, possibly months. "Do you have somewhere to stay, Wanda?" Barry asked. "The Red Cross shelter is only temporary." "I'll figure something out," I said, not wanting to admit I had limited options. I used my credit card to book a room at the Comfort Inn on the edge of town. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and safe. Each morning I'd return to what remained of my house, salvaging what I could, and meeting with contractors who gave increasingly depressing estimates for rebuilding. After 2 weeks, my emergency funds were dwindling fast. The insurance money was still tied up in paperwork. The FEMA assistance would barely cover a month of temporary housing. I needed a plan. That's when I thought of Jeffrey. My son lived in Westbrook, just 20 miles away, in a beautiful 4-bedroom house with a pool. I'd contributed $30,000 from Robert's life insurance toward his down payment. Surely he could spare a guest room for a few weeks while I sorted things out. I hadn't seen Jeffrey in person for almost 6 months, though we'd spoken on the phone a few times. He'd been too busy to attend Christmas dinner, sending a gift card instead. He'd missed my birthday in February, explaining that work was hectic. Since Robert died, our relationship had grown increasingly distant, but I chalked it up to grief affecting us differently. With few options left, I picked up my phone and called my son. Jeffrey and I had always been close when he was growing up. Robert worked long hours at the manufacturing plant, so it was often just the two of us. I attended every soccer game, helped with every school project, and was the room mother for his classes year after year. When he got accepted to college, I took on extra tutoring jobs to help with his tuition. When he graduated and needed a reliable car for his first corporate job, Robert and I co-signed the loan. Our relationship began changing after Robert died. At the funeral, Jeffrey was supportive, staying by my side throughout the service. But in the months that followed, he became increasingly unavailable. Our weekly Sunday dinners dwindled to monthly, then quarterly. Phone calls went to voicemail. Text messages received brief replies, hours or sometimes days later. The last time we'd been together was at Thanksgiving, an awkward dinner where Jeffrey spent most of the time checking his phone. When I asked about his work and life, his answers were vague and short. He left immediately after dessert, claiming an early meeting the next day. It hurt, but I told myself he was busy building his career at the marketing firm where he'd recently been promoted to senior account executive. When he mentioned wanting to buy a house in Westbrook, an upscale suburb, I immediately offered to help. The $30,000 from Robert's life insurance was meant for my retirement, but what better investment than helping my son Jeffrey? Seemed touched by the gesture, hugging me for the first time in months when I handed him the check. Now sitting in my hotel room with my world literally in pieces, I dialed his number, certain he would come through for me in this crisis. "Mom," he answered on the 4th ring. "Is everything okay? I'm heading into a meeting." "Jeffrey, there's been a tornado in Millfield," I explained, surprised he hadn't called to check on me given the regional news coverage. "My house is gone, completely destroyed." "Oh my God," he said, sounding genuinely shocked. "Are you hurt?" "No, I'm okay physically. I was in the basement when it hit. But Jeffrey, I've lost everything. The insurance won't cover the full rebuild, and it's going to take weeks to get even partial payment." "That's terrible, Mom. Have you called FEMA? I heard they help with disaster relief." "Yes, but the assistance is limited, and there's so much paperwork. I'm staying at a hotel right now, but I can't afford to keep doing that. I was wondering—" I paused, hating that I had to ask. "I was wondering if I could stay with you for a little while, just until the insurance money comes through and I can find a rental. A few weeks at most." The silence on the other end of the line stretched uncomfortably long. "Jeffrey." Yeah, I'm still here," he said finally. "The thing is, Mom, it's not a great time. Work is crazy busy and I'm hardly ever home." "I wouldn't be any trouble. I could even help around the house, make dinners." "It's just complicated right now," he interrupted. "I've got some personal stuff going on." "Personal stuff more important than helping your homeless mother." I regretted the words as soon as they left my mouth. "That's not fair, Mom. Look, can I call you back? I really need to get to this meeting. Sure, I said, fighting back tears. Call me back. He didn't call back that day, or the next. When I tried calling him again, it went straight to voicemail. I left a message. No response. 3 days later, with the hotel bill mounting and no word from Jeffrey, I made a decision. I packed my few salvaged possessions into my car and drove to Westbrook. I believed that face to face my son wouldn't turn me away. He couldn't. Jeffrey's house was even more beautiful than I remembered from my one previous visit shortly after he moved in. Pristine white with black shutters, professional landscaping, and a 3-car garage. It looked like something from a magazine. I parked in the driveway and took a deep breath before ringing the doorbell. A young woman answered. She was strikingly beautiful, with sleek dark hair and perfect makeup, dressed in designer yoga wear. She looked me up and down with unconcealed disapproval, taking in my secondhand clothes from the donation center. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice cool. "I'm Wanda Harrison Jeffrey's mother," I said, forcing a smile. "Is he home?" Her perfectly shaped eyebrows rose slightly. "Oh, yes, he's on a call in his office. I'm Adriana, his girlfriend. Please wait here." She closed the door partially, leaving me standing on the porch. Through the gap, I heard her speaking in a low, urgent voice. A moment later, Jeffrey appeared, looking uncomfortable. "Mom," he said, opening the door wider but not inviting me in. "You should have called first." "I tried," I reminded him gently. "Several times." He had the grace to look embarrassed. "Right, sorry. Things have been hectic. Why don't you come in for a minute?" The interior of the house was as impressive as the exterior. Open concept high ceilings, minimalist decor in shades of gray and white. Not a single item out of place. No photos visible anywhere I noticed. Jeffrey led me to the living room where Adriana was perched on the edge of a white sofa, her posture rigid, phone in hand. I sat across from them, suddenly feeling very small. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Jeffrey asked. I explained again about the tornado, the destruction of my home, the insurance delays, and my dwindling resources. As I spoke, I watched Adriana's expression harden. She placed her hand on Jeffrey's arm possessively. "That sounds really difficult," Jeffrey said when I finished. "But like I mentioned on the phone, it's not a good time for house guests." "I'm not a house guest, Jeffrey. I'm your mother. I have nowhere else to go." "There must be shelters or government assistance," Adriana interjected. "Or friends from your town." "Everyone in Millfield is dealing with their own tornado damage," I explained, "and the shelters are overcrowded and temporary." Jeffrey shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Adriana. Some unspoken communication passed between them. "Mom, we value our privacy," he said finally. "We both work from home a lot, and our routine is important to us. Having someone else here would be disruptive." I stared at my son, not quite believing what I was hearing. "I raised you for 18 years in a house half this size, Jeffrey. Somehow we managed." "That was different," he muttered. "How?" Adriana tightened her grip on his arm. He straightened his posture. "Mom, I'm sorry about your situation, I really am. But we want privacy. My girlfriend doesn't want you here. It's our house and that's our decision." The words hit me like physical blows. My own son, the baby I had nursed through colic and chickenpox, the boy I had cheered at every soccer game, the teenager whose heart I had helped mend after his first breakup, the young man whose education I had sacrificed to fund, was turning me away when I had nothing left. "I see," I said quietly, my voice somehow steady, despite the earthquake happening inside me. "Thank you for being honest." I stood up, legs shaking. "Let me at least give you some money to help with the hotel," Jeffrey offered, reaching for his wallet. It felt like the final insult. "No thank you," I said, walking toward the door. "I wouldn't want to disrupt your routine." I made it to my car before the tears came. Through the blur, I saw Jeffrey watching from the window, Adriana beside him, her hand on his shoulder. He didn't come out. He didn't call after me. He just watched me drive away. That night I couldn't face going back to the hotel. The humiliation of my son's rejection was too raw, too painful to process. I parked in a Walmart lot and reclined my seat, spending a sleepless night in my car, something I'd never done in my 65 years. I kept replaying Jeffrey's words in my mind. My girlfriend doesn't want you here. When had my son become someone who would choose a girlfriend's comfort over his mother's basic needs? By morning, shame had joined my emotional storm. What kind of mother raises a son who would turn her away after she lost everything? What had I done wrong? The questions tormented me as I drove aimlessly, no destination in mind, no home to return to. The next few days passed in a fog of shock and grief. I found a rundown motel on the outskirts of Millfield that charged by the week. It was all I could afford now that my savings were nearly depleted. The room smelled of cigarettes despite the no smoking sign, and the carpet was stained in patterns I tried not to analyze too closely. But it had a roof and a lock on the door. In my new reality, that counted as luxury. Each morning I would force myself to get up and continue the paperwork marathon for insurance and disaster assistance. Each afternoon, I would drive to the remains of my home, now just a concrete foundation, with a few structural beams poking up like broken bones. Each evening, I would return to the motel and try not to cry myself to sleep. My emotions cycled through shock, grief, and anger like a washing machine stuck on repeat. I was shocked that in an instant, the home that represented my life's work could be reduced to rubble. I grieved for the mementos and treasures that were irreplaceable. Robert's favorite sweater that still smelled faintly of him, the handprint art Jeffrey had made in kindergarten, the china set my grandmother had brought from England. And I was angry at the tornado's random destruction, at the insurance company's delays, and most painfully, at my son's callous rejection. After a week, necessity forced me to look for work. At 65, my options were limited, but I'd been a teacher for over 3 decades. Surely those skills were transferable. I applied at tutoring centers, daycare facilities, and after-school programs. Each application resulted in the same polite rejection: "We'll keep your resume on file." What they didn't say, but I clearly understood, was that no one wanted to hire a senior citizen who looked shell-shocked and was living in a motel. I tried not to take it personally. After all, I wouldn't hire me either in my current state. On a particularly low day, I stopped at a small coffee shop in town, treating myself to an affordable luxury. As I stared into my cup, someone called my name. "Mrs. Harrison, is that really you?" I looked up to see a young woman with a warm smile. It took me a moment to place her. "Amber Lewis," she said. "You taught me in 4th grade, class of 2003. Memories flooded back. Amber had been a bright, compassionate child who struggled with reading but excelled at science. "Amber." I managed a genuine smile for the first time in weeks. "How wonderful to see you." She sat down without asking, her friendly demeanor a balm to my wounded spirit. "I heard about your house in the tornado. I'm so sorry. Are you staying with family?" The question reopened the wound of Jeffrey's rejection. "No," I said simply. "I'm figuring things out." Amber's expression shifted to concern. "Do you need anything? I'm working at the pharmacy now, and we've been collecting supplies for tornado victims. I could put together a care package." Her kindness nearly undid me. "That would be very helpful, actually." We talked for almost an hour. Amber was now married with 2 young children. She showed me photos and told me about her husband, who worked as a nurse at the county hospital. When we parted, she hugged me tightly and promised to drop off supplies at my motel. True to her word, Amber arrived that evening with a box of toiletries, some basic clothing items, and a gift card to the local grocery store. She also brought a home-cooked meal. "It's not much," she said apologetically, "but Mom always said your kindness made a huge difference to me in school. I just wish I could do more." "This is more than enough," I assured her, fighting back tears. "Thank you." After she left, I sat on the edge of the bed, eating the still warm lasagna, wondering how a former student could show me more compassion than my own son. The contrast was both heartwarming and heartbreaking. That night, unable to sleep despite exhaustion, I scrolled through photos on my phone. Most of my physical photos had been destroyed in the tornado, but I had some digital memories saved. I found myself looking at pictures from my 40th high school reunion 10 years ago. There I was, 55 and recently dyed blonde, wearing a blue dress that Robert had said brought out my eyes. And beside me, with his arm casually around my waist, stood Thomas Reeves. Thomas had been my high school sweetheart, my first love. We dated throughout junior and senior years, making plans for the future with the certainty only teenagers can muster. But when college came, we went to different states. The long-distance relationship lasted one semester before reality set in. We parted ways, both crying, but agreeing it was for the best. Life went on. I met Robert in college, fell in love, married, and built a life. Thomas faded to a fond memory, occasionally wondered about, but never contacted, until the reunion. Walking into that hotel ballroom and seeing him across the room had been like a scene from a movie. The years fell away in an instant. He was older, of course, his dark hair now silver at the temples, laugh lines around his eyes, but his smile was exactly the same. We spent most of the evening catching up. He had become a real estate developer, starting small after college and gradually building a successful company. He'd married and had 3 children, but had been divorced for 5 years. The connection between us was immediate and undeniable, but we were both careful to keep it friendly. After all, I was happily married. At the end of the evening, we exchanged phone numbers, promising to stay in touch. And we did occasionally. Birthday texts, Christmas cards, a sympathy call when Robert passed away. Nothing inappropriate, just the comfortable communication of old friends. Our last contact had been a happy birthday text nearly a year ago. As I stared at the reunion photo, a crazy idea began to form. Thomas had mentioned in our sporadic communications that he had expanded his business to include several states, including Oklahoma. What if I called him not for romance? That was the last thing on my mind right now. But for advice about my insurance situation and rebuilding options. He was, after all, in real estate development. I checked the time. Nearly midnight. Too late to call anyone, let alone someone I hadn't spoken to in a year. I bookmarked the contact for tomorrow's consideration and finally drifted into uneasy sleep. The next morning brought a new low. I ran into Jeffrey at the insurance office in Millfield. He was in a suit, looking every inch the successful professional. Adriana was with him, designer sunglasses perched on her head, scrolling through her phone. "Mom," he said, clearly surprised. "What are you doing here? The same thing as everyone else?" I gestured around the crowded waiting room full of tornado victims. "Trying to get my claim processed." "Right." He shifted uncomfortably. "How are you doing?" "I'm living in a motel and wearing donated clothes, but I'm alive," I said, trying to keep bitterness from my voice. Adriana looked up from her phone long enough to give me a cursory nod before returning to her screen. "We're just here to check on a rental property Jeffrey owns in town," she explained without being asked. "It had minor damage. Nothing like your situation." I hadn't known Jeffrey owned rental property in Millfield. Another reminder of how distant we'd become. "Do you need help with paperwork or anything?" Jeffrey asked, glancing at his watch. "No," I said, pride straightening my spine. "I've been handling paperwork since before you were born. I'll manage." "Okay, well, good luck," he said, already moving toward the counter where an agent had called his name. Adriana followed, not bothering to say goodbye. I watched them, this son I no longer recognized, and the woman who clearly had such influence over him. When had Jeffrey become someone who would check on a rental property, but not his mother? When had my sweet boy turned into this cold stranger? That afternoon, sitting in my motel room staring at the water stain on the ceiling, I made my decision. I found Thomas's contact in my phone and pressed dial before I could talk myself out of it. He answered on the second ring. "Hello?" His voice was exactly as I remembered it, deep and warm. For a moment I couldn't speak. "Hello, is anyone there?" he prompted. "Thomas. It's Wanda. Wanda Harrison. Well, Wanda Miller when you knew me." "Wanda." The genuine pleasure in his voice was palpable. "What a wonderful surprise. How are you?" The simple question broke my carefully constructed composure. To my horror, I began to cry. Wanda, what's wrong? Alarm replaced the warmth in his tone. Between sobs, I managed to explain the tornado, the destruction of my home, the insurance complications, and yes, even Jeffrey's rejection. It all came pouring out in an undignified rush. I'm so sorry to call you like this, I said, finally regaining control. It's just that you're in real estate and I thought you might have advice about dealing with the insurance company or contractors. I don't expect anything else. It was stupid to call after so long. Wanda, stop, Thomas said firmly. First of all, I'm horrified about what you're going through. Second, of course, I want to help. And third, I'm actually in Oklahoma City right now for a development project. I could drive to Millfield tomorrow if that would be useful. His offer was so unexpected, so generous, that it left me speechless. You don't have to do that, I finally managed. I'm sure you're busy. I'm the boss. I decide what's important, he replied. And helping an old friend in need seems pretty important to me. Text me your address. I'll be there by noon tomorrow. After we hung up, I sat staring at the phone, wondering if I'd done the right thing. Thomas and I had history, yes, but that was literally decades ago. We were different people now. What if meeting in person was awkward? What if he took one look at me, tornado-ravaged motel-dwelling me, and regretted his offer? But what choice did I have? My son had turned his back on me. My savings were nearly gone. The insurance process was moving at a glacial pace. I needed help, and Thomas had offered it. Pride was a luxury I could no longer afford. I texted him the motel address, then spent the rest of the evening cleaning the room as best I could and washing my limited wardrobe in the bathroom sink. It wasn't much, but it was all I could do to prepare for tomorrow. The knock on my motel room door came precisely at noon. I'd been ready since 10, anxiety making sleep impossible and magnifying every perceived flaw in my appearance. The tornado had taken my home, my possessions, and apparently my self-confidence as well. I opened the door to find Thomas standing there, looking remarkably similar to the man in the reunion photo, despite the decade that had passed. His hair was fully silver now, but thick and stylishly cut. He wore a casual button-down shirt and jeans that looked expensive in that understated way that quality clothing does. His smile was exactly as I remembered from high school. Warm, slightly crooked, reaching all the way to his eyes. Wanda, he said, and there was something in the way he said my name, a familiar cadence that transported me back to high school hallways and football games. Thomas, I replied, suddenly self-conscious about my thrift store outfit and the dingy motel room behind me. Thank you for coming. I know it's an imposition. Stop that right now, he said firmly. No friend of mine is going to apologize for reaching out after losing everything in a natural disaster. Now, are you hungry? I passed a diner on the way here that looked promising. The directness of his approach was refreshing after weeks of tiptoeing around my own despair. Starving, actually. Perfect. My treat. And on the way, you can fill me in on everything the insurance company has told you so far. 10 minutes later, we were settled in a booth at Lou's Diner, a local institution that had miraculously survived the tornado. Thomas insisted I order a full meal, not just coffee and toast as I'd planned. The waitress Doris recognized me as a regular from before the disaster and squeezed my shoulder sympathetically as she took our orders. Half the town comes in here talking about rebuilding, she told Thomas. Wanda taught most of their kids over the years. Everybody loves Mrs. Harrison. That doesn't surprise me one bit, Thomas replied, his eyes on me. She was the kindest person in our high school. Some things don't change. After Doris left, Thomas leaned forward. Now tell me exactly what's happening with your insurance claim. I explained the details, the percentage they were willing to cover, the delays, the paperwork runaround. Thomas listened intently, occasionally making notes on his phone. He asked pointed, specific questions that I wouldn't have thought to ask. And your son, he said finally, his tone carefully neutral. He's really not offering any help at all. The question reopened the wound, but I forced myself to answer honestly. No. He and his girlfriend want their privacy. Apparently having his homeless mother stay in their 4-bedroom house would be too disruptive. Thomas's expression darkened. I have 3 children, and I cannot imagine any of them behaving that way. I'm sorry, Wanda. That must hurt terribly. The simple acknowledgement of my pain without judgment or platitudes was unexpected. My eyes welled up with tears I thought I'd exhausted. It does, I admitted. More than the house, honestly. Houses can be rebuilt. Thomas reached across the table and briefly covered my hand with his. Yes, they can. And that's exactly what we're going to focus on today. After lunch, I'd like to see your property if that's okay. I might be able to give you some guidance on next steps. That would be wonderful, I said, relief washing over me. For the first time since the tornado, I felt like someone competent was on my side. After lunch, we drove separately to what remained of my home on Maple Street. Standing at the edge of the foundation, Thomas walked the perimeter professionally, taking photos and making notes. The good news is, the foundation appears intact, he said finally. That's a significant saving if you decide to rebuild. The bad news is the current construction costs in disaster areas tend to be inflated due to demand. So what would you recommend? I asked. First, we need to light a fire under your insurance company, he said decisively. I know some phrases that tend to get their attention. Second, we need to get multiple contractor bids. Third, we need to explore whether you want to rebuild exactly what was here or consider other options. Other options. Selling the land, building something smaller, relocating entirely. He looked at me directly. What's keeping you in Millfield now? It was a question I hadn't allowed myself to consider. I'd taught at Millfield Elementary for my entire career. Robert and I had built our life here. But now my house was gone. My husband was gone. My son didn't want me. The school had younger teachers now. I don't know, I admitted. Habit, I suppose. Thomas nodded, understanding. You don't need to decide anything today, but it's worth considering all possibilities. He spent the next hour making calls on my behalf, using industry jargon and a confident tone that seemed to get immediate results. By late afternoon, he'd scheduled 2 contractor visits for the following day, set up a meeting with my insurance agent, and filed a complaint with the State Insurance Commission that he promised would expedite my claim. One more thing, he said, as we prepared to leave the property. I have a rental house in Westbrook that's currently vacant. It's being prepared for new tenants, but it won't be on the market for at least 2 months. You're welcome to stay there in the meantime, no charge. Thomas, I couldn't possibly. You can and you will, he interrupted gently. It's sitting empty anyway, all utilities on. It would actually help me to have someone there. Consider yourself a property caretaker if it makes you feel better. I looked at this man who had stepped into my catastrophe with such calm competence and generosity. Why are you doing all this? His expression softened. Because 47 years ago, when Brad Thompson made fun of my secondhand clothes in front of the entire cafeteria, you sat down next to me and shared your lunch like nothing had happened. Because you were the first person to tell me I was smart enough for college. Because you were my first love, Wanda. And even though life took us in different directions, I never forgot your kindness. His words left me speechless. I remembered that cafeteria incident vaguely, but had no idea it had meant so much to him. Plus, he added with a grin, I'm a sucker for a damsel in distress, especially one who can still make me laugh after all these years. That made me smile despite everything. I'm hardly a damsel anymore, Thomas. Says who? Now what do you say? Will you accept my help and the temporary housing? In that moment, standing amid the ruins of my old life, I made a decision. Yes, thank you. Thomas's rental property turned out to be a lovely 2-bedroom cottage with a garden in a quiet Westbrook neighborhood. It was fully furnished, immaculately clean, and more beautiful than any place I'd ever lived. When he showed me around that evening, I kept waiting for the catch, the strings that must be attached to such generosity. There were none. The kitchen is fully stocked with basics, he explained, opening cabinets to reveal pasta rice canned goods. The sheets are clean, internet is connected. Make yourself at home, Wanda. My property manager, Sarah, left her card on the counter if you need anything. Thomas, this is too much, I protested weakly. "It's not nearly enough," he countered. "Not after what you've been through. Now I'll pick you up at 9 tomorrow for the insurance meeting. Get some rest." After he left, I walked slowly through the cottage, running my fingers over the smooth countertops, the soft sofa, the real bed with actual pillows. After weeks in a dingy motel, it felt like a palace. I took a long hot shower in the clean bathroom, put on one of the donated nightgowns, and slept more soundly than I had since the tornado. The next morning, Thomas arrived promptly at 9, dressed more formally in a suit that screamed quiet authority. "Ready to battle some insurance agents?" he asked with a wink. The meeting went better than I could have imagined. With Thomas beside me, using terms like bad faith denial and statutory obligations, the insurance company suddenly found ways to expedite my claim. By the end of the day, I had written confirmation that a check for 60% of my claim would be issued within a week, with the remainder to follow after additional documentation. "That's how it's done," Thomas said, as we left the office, satisfaction evident in his voice. "Now let's go meet those contractors at your property." Over the next several days, Thomas helped me navigate the rebuilding options. We reviewed contractor bids, discussed material choices, and calculated costs against the expected insurance payout. Each evening we'd have dinner together, sometimes at local restaurants, sometimes at the cottage where I would cook simple meals from the supplies he'd provided. We talked about everything and nothing: our children, our careers, the books we'd read, the places we'd traveled. It was easy, comfortable, like reconnecting with an old friend, which I supposed was exactly what was happening. There was no pressure, no expectations, just two people who had once cared for each other, finding their way back to friendship amid disaster. Word travels fast in small towns. By the end of the first week in Westbrook, I began hearing whispers when Thomas and I were seen together. At the hardware store where we were picking out sample paint colors, the clerk asked if we were an item. At the local cafe, I overheard someone describing Thomas as Wanda Harrison's rich boyfriend. Thomas found it amusing. "Let them talk," he said with a shrug. "At our age, being the subject of gossip is almost flattering." I was less comfortable with the attention, particularly when I ran into a former colleague from the school who asked pointed questions about my sudden good fortune with barely concealed suspicion. "People will always talk," Thomas reassured me. "The question is whether you let it bother you. I learned long ago that other people's opinions matter far less than doing what feels right." His confidence was contagious. Gradually, I stopped worrying about what others thought and focused instead on the surprising gift of having someone in my corner again. Then, 10 days after I moved into the cottage, Jeffrey showed up unannounced. I was alone, Thomas having returned to Oklahoma City for business meetings. The doorbell rang around 6 in the evening. When I opened it, my son stood on the porch, his expression a mixture of embarrassment and defiance. "Hi, Mom," he said. "Nice place. Word around town is you've moved up in the world." His tone had an edge that immediately put me on guard. "Jeffrey, this is unexpected. Can I come in?" I hesitated, then stepped aside. Jeffrey entered, looking around with undisguised curiosity. "So the rumors are true," he said, taking in the tasteful furnishings. "You're living in Thomas Reeves' house, the Thomas Reeves local boy made good multimillionaire developer." "I'm staying here temporarily while I sort out my situation," I corrected. "Thomas has been very kind." "Kind," Jeffrey repeated with a slight sneer. "And how exactly did you reconnect with your high school boyfriend so quickly after the tornado? Seems convenient." The implication stung. "If you must know, I called him for advice about the insurance situation. He offered to help." Just like that, a guy you haven't seen in decades drops everything to rescue you. "Come on, Mom." "Actually, we saw each other at my high school reunion 10 years ago and kept in touch occasionally since then," I said, my voice tightening. "Not that I owe you an explanation." Jeffrey's expression hardened. "So while you were married to Dad, you were keeping in touch with an old flame?" "It wasn't like that," I said, anger rising. "We exchanged birthday cards, Christmas greetings, nothing inappropriate. Your father knew." And now that Dad's gone, this rich guy swoops in and suddenly you're living in one of his properties, driving around town with him, letting him fight your battles. My battles that you refused to help with, I reminded him, my patience snapping. You turned me away when I had nothing. You chose your girlfriend's comfort over your mother's basic needs. You don't get to judge how I put my life back together. So this is what it's about. Jeffrey gestured around the room. Punishing me? Making me look bad by moving in with some millionaire? Not everything is about you, Jeffrey. This is about me surviving a catastrophe with no help from my only child. The front door opened before Jeffrey could respond. Thomas walked in carrying a takeout bag. I brought dinner, he announced cheerfully, then stopped short at the scene before him. Oh, I didn't realize you had company. Thomas, this is my son Jeffrey, I said stiffly. Jeffrey Thomas Reeves. Thomas extended his hand. Nice to meet you, Jeffrey. I've heard a lot about you. Jeffrey ignored the outstretched hand. I bet you have. I'm sure my mother has told you all about what a terrible son I am. Actually, Thomas said, evenly lowering his hand, she mostly talks about how proud she is of your career success, but I have drawn my own conclusions about your character based on your actions during this crisis. Jeffrey's face flushed. You don't know anything about me or my relationship with my mother. I know that when she lost everything, you told her your girlfriend didn't want her in your home. I know that you haven't called to check on her or offered any meaningful help. I know that you're standing in the living room of the house I offered her out of basic human decency, questioning her character rather than examining your own. Jeffrey looked from Thomas to me, his expression darkening. So that's it. You've replaced Dad with this guy, and now you're letting him fight your battles. What happened to the independent woman who raised me? She lost everything in a tornado, I said quietly, and then lost her son when he turned his back on her. She's learning to accept help where it's genuinely offered. This is unbelievable, Jeffrey muttered. You know what Adriana was right about you. You've always been manipulative, using guilt to get your way. Well, it won't work on me anymore. Enjoy your new sugar daddy, Mom. I'm done. He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I stood frozen, his cruel words echoing in my ears. The tears came suddenly hot and unstoppable. Thomas set down the takeout bag and gently guided me to the sofa. I'm sorry, he said. I shouldn't have intervened. It's not your fault, I managed between sobs. He's been different since his father died. I don't know what happened to the sweet boy I raised. Grief affects people in strange ways, Thomas said thoughtfully. Sometimes it's easier to push people away than face the pain of possibly losing them too. Or maybe I just raised a selfish person, I said bitterly. I doubt that very much, Thomas replied. You're one of the least selfish people I've ever known, Wanda, and apples generally don't fall far from trees. His faith in me and the job I'd done as a mother was both comforting and painful, given the evidence to the contrary that had just stormed out the door. I cried until I was empty. Thomas sitting quietly beside me, his steady presence an anchor in the storm. Later, after I'd washed my face and we'd eaten the now cold takeout, Thomas made a suggestion that would change the course of my recovery. There's a disaster relief center being set up in Millfield, he said. They're looking for volunteers who understand what the victims are going through. I thought you might be interested. I hadn't considered volunteering. Between insurance paperwork, rebuilding decisions, and my own emotional trauma, I'd been entirely focused inward. Do you think I could be helpful? I asked uncertainly. Wanda, you were a teacher for 32 years. You're organized, compassionate, and you've just lived through the same disaster. You'd be perfect. The idea of doing something productive, of helping others who were suffering as I had been, was appealing. I'll look into it tomorrow. The relief center turned out to be a converted community hall near the edge of town. When I arrived the next morning, it was a hive of activity. Volunteers sorting donations, setting up computer stations for assistance applications, arranging a children's area with toys and books. The coordinator, Janet, was a brisk, efficient woman in her 50s who brightened when I introduced myself. Wanda Harrison, the elementary school teacher. "Oh, my daughter Emma had you in fourth grade. She loved you. What can you do for us?" By the end of the day, I had a regular volunteer position, helping tornado victims navigate the maze of insurance claims, FEMA applications, and housing options. My own experience made me an effective guide, and the gratitude of those I helped was a balm to my wounded spirit. For the first time since the tornado, I felt useful again. Thomas supported my volunteer work enthusiastically, often dropping me off and picking me up, occasionally bringing lunch for all the volunteers. His generosity extended beyond me to the entire relief effort, with anonymous donations of supplies and equipment appearing regularly. As weeks passed, a routine developed. Mornings at the relief center, afternoons working on my own rebuilding plans or insurance paperwork, evenings with Thomas talking and laughing over dinner, watching old movies, sharing stories of our lives during the decades we'd been apart. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, our relationship evolved. A hand held while walking, a lingering hug, goodnight, a brush of lips against a cheek. We were taking things slowly, respectful of our history and cautious about the future, but there was no denying the connection between us. "I never stopped wondering about you," Thomas admitted one evening as we sat on the cottage porch watching the sunset. "Every milestone in my life, every achievement, I would think, I wonder what Wanda would say about this. Isn't that strange?" "Not strange," I replied. "I did the same thing. Even when I was happily married to Robert, I'd occasionally wonder how your life had turned out." "And now here we are," he said, taking my hand, "through the strangest of circumstances." "Here we are," I agreed, feeling a contentment I hadn't expected to find again. As my insurance settlement finalized and construction plans came together, I faced a decision: rebuild on my old property in Millfield, or consider other options. With Thomas's guidance, I explored alternatives: a smaller, more efficient home on my existing lot, a condominium in town with less maintenance, relocating entirely to a new community. "What do you want, Wanda?" Thomas asked when I wavered between options. "Not what makes financial sense or practical sense, but what would make you happy." It was a question I'd rarely asked myself. As a wife, mother, and teacher, I'd spent decades considering others' needs first. What did I want for myself now that I had the chance to start fresh? The answer came to me gradually as I worked at the relief center, helping others rebuild their lives. I wanted purpose, community, connection. And yes, I wanted the new relationship with Thomas to have a chance to grow. After much consideration, I decided to sell my Millfield property and purchase a small modern home in Westbrook, not far from the cottage where I was staying. It was a practical decision in many ways: closer to the conveniences of the larger town, less maintenance than my old home within my budget after the insurance settlement, but also an emotional one. It represented a fresh start, a new chapter. Thomas helped me find the perfect place, a two-bedroom ranch-style home, with a garden in a friendly neighborhood. When the closing papers were signed and the keys handed over, he surprised me with a housewarming gift: a custom doormat that read, "Wanda's Fresh Start." "It's perfect," I said, fighting happy tears. "Thank you for everything, Thomas. I don't know how I would have managed without you." "You would have figured it out," he said with confidence. "You're stronger than you know, Wanda. I just made the journey a little easier." 6 months after the tornado tore apart my home and my relationship with my son, I moved into my new house. The Disaster Relief Center had evolved into a community resilience program, and I'd taken on a paid part-time position coordinating volunteer efforts. My new home was comfortable and exactly right for this stage of my life. And Thomas and I had acknowledged that what had begun as friendship had blossomed into something deeper, something neither of us had expected to find again at our age. The only shadow on my new happiness was Jeffrey. We hadn't spoken since that awful confrontation at the cottage. I'd sent a few text messages, left voicemails, even mailed a card with my new address, all met with silence. The pain of his rejection had dulled from acute to chronic, a background ache I was learning to live with. Then one ordinary Tuesday, I received a letter. The handwriting on the envelope was immediately recognizable: Jeffrey's distinctive script, so similar to his father's. Inside was a 3-page handwritten letter that began simply, "Mom, I'm sorry." What followed was a painful, honest accounting of his behavior and its causes. He wrote about his unprocessed grief over his father's death, his fear of losing me too, and his unhealthy relationship with Adriana, which had recently ended. "She controlled more than I realized," he wrote. "Isolated me from friends, family, and especially you. It's not an excuse for how I treated you, but maybe it helps explain it. When I saw how quickly Thomas stepped up to help you, it made me feel even worse about my own failure as a son. Instead of admitting I was wrong, I lashed out. I'm deeply ashamed." The letter ended with a request. "If you're willing, I'd like to meet for lunch, just to talk. I understand if you need more time, or if you can't forgive me yet. Either way, I want you to know I'm working on becoming someone you can be proud of again." I read the letter 3 times, emotions swirling. Thomas, who had been with me when it arrived, waited patiently for my reaction. "Jeffrey wants to meet," I said finally. He apologized. "Are you ready for that?" Thomas asked carefully. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to rush to him to fix everything. Another part is afraid of being hurt again." "Both reactions are completely valid," Thomas said. "There's no rush to decide." After much thought, I arranged to meet Jeffrey for lunch at a neutral location, a cafe halfway between Westbrook and his home. I asked Thomas not to come feeling this was something I needed to handle alone. Jeffrey was already waiting when I arrived, looking thinner and less polished than when I'd last seen him. He stood awkwardly as I approached the table. "Mom," he said, uncertainty in his voice. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for the letter," I replied, sitting down. The first few minutes were stiff, both of us carefully navigating the minefield of hurt feelings and broken trust. Gradually, as we talked, the tension eased. Jeffrey explained more about his relationship with Adriana, how she had systematically isolated him from friends and family, criticized his devotion to me, and manipulated him into believing her negative narrative about me. "It's a classic pattern," he said ruefully. "I should have recognized it, but by the time the tornado hit, I was so deep in her control that I couldn't see clearly. When she said having you stay would be an imposition, I didn't have the strength to stand up to her." "What changed?" I asked. "Seeing you with Thomas," he admitted. "The way he defended you, the respect he showed you. It was like seeing Dad again in how he treated you. It made me realize how far I'd fallen from the values you and Dad taught me." He explained that after our confrontation, he'd started therapy to deal with his unresolved grief over his father's death and his codependent relationship with Adriana. When he finally found the courage to stand up to her controlling behavior, the relationship quickly deteriorated. "I'm not telling you all this to make excuses," he said earnestly. "What I did was inexcusable. I'm just trying to explain that I wasn't myself, and I'm working to become a better person." I listened, feeling the wall around my heart slowly crumbling. This was my son, my only child. Despite everything, I loved him. "Jeffrey," I said finally, "what hurt most wasn't that you couldn't take me in. It was that you didn't even try to help in other ways. You didn't call to check on me. You didn't offer assistance with paperwork or finding a place to stay. You just disappeared when I needed you most." He nodded, tears welling in his eyes. "I know. I failed you completely. And I will regret that for the rest of my life. I don't expect immediate forgiveness, Mom. I just hope we can start rebuilding our relationship the way you've rebuilt your life." It wasn't a perfect conversation. There were moments of tension, old hurts bubbling to the surface. But it was a beginning, a foundation for healing the rift between us. "I'm not ready for things to go back to normal," I told him honestly. "I need time, and I need to see consistent change. But I'm willing to work on it. You're my son, and I love you." Jeffrey nodded, relief evident in his face. "That's more than I deserve. Thank you, Mom." As we parted, he hugged me tentatively. I returned the embrace, feeling the familiar shape of my child in my arms, despite his adult size. We agreed to weekly phone calls and monthly lunches, a gradual rebuilding of trust. When I told Thomas about the meeting later, he listened without judgment. "How do you feel about it?" he asked. "Cautiously optimistic," I said. "He seems genuinely remorseful and self-aware, but I'm keeping my expectations reasonable." "That's wise," Thomas agreed. "Trust takes time to rebuild once it's broken." The next evening, as we sat on the patio of my new home watching fireflies in the garden, Thomas took my hand. "I've been thinking about something," he said, unusually hesitant. "That sounds serious?" I teased. "It is, actually." He turned to face me fully. "Wanda, these past 6 months have been some of the happiest of my life, despite the circumstances that brought us together. I know we've both had full lives, marriages, children, careers, but I can't help feeling that we've been given a second chance at something special." My heart quickened. "I feel that too." "I'm not proposing marriage," he clarified with a smile. "At least not yet. But I am proposing a future together. Travel adventures, quiet evenings like this. I love you, Wanda. I think I started loving you again the moment I heard your voice on the phone that day." The declaration, simple and heartfelt, filled me with unexpected joy. "I love you too, Thomas. And yes to all of it. The travel, the adventures, the quiet evenings." He leaned in to kiss me, a kiss full of promise for the future. When we parted, he had one more surprise. "I was thinking we might start with Italy in the fall," he said. "I've always wanted to see Venice, and I seem to recall you mentioning it was on your bucket list." "Venice!" I laughed in delight. "Are you serious?" "Completely," he assured me. "Life is too short and too unpredictable not to seize happiness when you find it. A tornado taught you that lesson the hard way. I'd prefer to learn from your experience rather than have one of my own." As we sat planning our Italian adventure, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past 6 months. From the devastating loss of my home, to the painful rejection by my son, to finding unexpected love with Thomas, and now the beginning of reconciliation with Jeffrey, it had been a whirlwind of destruction and creation, endings and beginnings. The tornado that had torn apart my house had also torn away the comfortable illusions of my life, forcing me to rebuild not just a physical structure, but my understanding of family love and self-worth. In losing everything, I had gained a clearer vision of what truly mattered. 1 week later, Thomas and I visited the Disaster Relief Center together. A new family had just arrived, an elderly woman who had lost her home in a recent fire. As Thomas and I approached to offer assistance, I recognized in her eyes the same shell-shocked expression I had worn 6 months earlier. "Everything's gone," she told us, voice quavering. 60 years in that house, and now it's all gone." I took her hand gently. "I know exactly how you feel. I lost my home in the tornado last spring." "How did you get through it?" she asked, desperate for reassurance. I glanced at Thomas, who smiled encouragingly. "One day at a time," I told her, "with help from others, including some from unexpected places. And by realizing that home isn't just a building, it's the life you create and the people you choose to share it with." As we helped her complete paperwork and find temporary housing, I felt the circle completing. From victim to helper, from lost to found, from broken to rebuilt, stronger and more beautiful for having been through the fire. The tornado that destroyed my house 6 months ago took everything I owned in an instant. But what it gave me in return was far more valuable. A clear understanding of who truly cared about me, the strength to rebuild not just a house, but a life on my own terms, and unexpectedly a second chance at love with my high school sweetheart. When Jeffrey rejected me in my moment of greatest need, saying, "We want privacy, my girlfriend doesn't want you here," it broke my heart. But it also freed me from illusions about our relationship and forced me to reach out beyond my comfort zone. Calling Thomas was an act of desperation that turned into the best decision I could have made. The journey of healing hasn't been simple. Rebuilding trust with Jeffrey is a work in progress. Creating a new home took time and tears. Learning to open my heart to love again required courage I wasn't sure I possessed. But standing on the other side of devastation, I can honestly say I'm grateful for the storm that changed everything. I've learned that family isn't defined by blood or obligation, but by love and respect. I've discovered strengths within myself I never knew existed. And I've found that second acts in life can be even more beautiful than the first, especially when built on the wisdom that only comes from weathering life's storms. Have you ever experienced a moment where what seemed like the worst thing that could happen turned out to be the catalyst for positive change? Has a difficult situation ever revealed who truly cares about you? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Please like this video. If my journey resonated with you, subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and renewal, and share with someone who might need encouragement after their own personal storm. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes losing everything is just the beginning of finding what you truly need.